June 6th, 1996, 2:31 a.m. Darlie Routier calls 911 from her Rowlett, Texas home, screaming that an intruder has stabbed her children. When police arrive, they find a scene of unimaginable horror. 6-year-old Devin Routier is dead from stab wounds to his chest. 5-year-old Damon Routier is clinging to life with wounds to his back and chest. He dies shortly after arriving at the hospital. Darlie Routier has a slash across her throat that barely missed her carotid artery and defensive wounds on her arms. The living room is in chaos, with blood everywhere and evidence of a violent struggle. Initially, police treat Darlie as a victim and survivor of a brutal home invasion that killed her 2 young sons. But within days, the investigation takes a dramatic turn. Detectives begin to suspect that Darlie Routier didn't survive the attack she committed it. They theorize that Darlie killed her own children, staged an elaborate crime scene to make it look like a home invasion, and inflicted wounds on herself to support her story. The prosecution's case seemed overwhelming. They had blood spatter evidence that allegedly proved Darlie had raised a knife overhead to stab her children. They had a timeline that supposedly showed Darlie had enough time to commit the murders, stage the scene, and injure herself before calling 911. They had motive, financial stress, and Darlie's allegedly selfish lifestyle. Darlie Routier was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death. She has been on Texas death row for over 25 years. But there's a problem with the evidence that sent Darlie Routier to death row. Multiple problems, actually. The blood spatter analysis that formed the cornerstone of the prosecution's case was based on methodology that forensic scientists now consider unreliable and scientifically invalid. 2 bloody fingerprints found at the crime scene don't match Darlie, her husband, her children, or anyone else who had legitimate access to the house. A knife impression found in the carpet doesn't match the murder weapon that was allegedly used in the attack. The prosecution's timeline requires Darlie to commit an impossible sequence of actions in approximately 8 minutes, stab both children multiple times, stage an elaborate crime scene, plant evidence 75 yards away from the house, and inflict potentially fatal wounds on herself. Most importantly, DNA testing that could definitively prove Darlie's innocence or guilt has been ordered by courts since 2018, but remains incomplete as of 2026, nearly 8 years later. The Innocence Project has taken on Darlie's case, arguing that she is an innocent woman who has been on death row for almost 3 decades, based on junk science and impossible timelines. Tonight, we examine the blood evidence that doesn't match, the timeline that's scientifically impossible, and the forensic questions that suggest one of America's most notorious mothers may actually be innocent of killing her children. Before we examine the disputed evidence that has kept Darlie Routier on death row for over 25 years, make sure you're subscribed to the Investigation Room and hit that notification bell right now. Here at the Investigation Room, we investigate cases where junk science, flawed forensic evidence, and impossible timelines have resulted in wrongful convictions. The Darlie Routier case represents one of the most controversial death penalty cases in American history, where blood spatter analysis that is now considered scientifically unreliable was used to convict a mother of murdering her own children. New comprehensive investigations every week, examining the forensic evidence that others accept without question, and revealing how outdated science can send innocent people to death row. Drop a like if you believe death penalty cases should be based on reliable forensic evidence and scientifically possible timelines, not outdated methodology and prosecutorial theories. And let me know in the comments what you think about cases where new science challenges death penalty convictions. Because what we're about to reveal about the Darlie Routier case will shock you and raise serious questions about whether Texas is preparing to execute an innocent woman. Now, let's examine how disputed blood evidence and an impossible timeline have kept an innocent mother on death row for nearly 3 decades. Darlie Lynn Peck was born on January 4th, 1970, in Altoona, Pennsylvania, but grew up in Lubbock, Texas. She was described as a popular, outgoing teenager who was known for her beauty and vivacious personality. After high school, she moved to the Dallas area, where she met Darren Routier, a young entrepreneur who was starting his own electronics business. The couple married in August 1988, when Darlie was 18 years old, and they seemed to embody the American dream of young love, ambition, and success. Darren's business, TestNet, specialized in circuit board testing equipment and was successful enough to provide the couple with an affluent lifestyle in the growing suburb of Rowlett. Darlie and Darren Routier appeared to be living a charmed life in the early 1990s. They built a large, expensive home in an upscale neighborhood, drove luxury cars, and enjoyed the lifestyle that Darren's business success afforded them. Darlie was a devoted mother who seemed to love spending time with her children and creating a beautiful home for her family. Friends and neighbors described her as caring, fun-loving, and completely devoted to her sons Devin, Damon, and baby Drake, who was born in October 1995. The Routiers seemed to represent everything that was right about American suburbia: a successful business, a beautiful family, and the prosperity that comes from hard work and determination. Devin Routier was born on June 14, 1989, and was described by everyone who knew him as a bright, energetic boy who loved sports and was excited about starting first grade. Damon Routier was born on February 19, 1991, and was known as a sweet, affectionate child who loved his older brother and was always following him around. The two boys were close in age and were best friends, playing together constantly and sharing a room in the family's large home. Darlie was pregnant with their third child, Drake, in 1995, and the family seemed complete and happy as they prepared for the arrival of their newest member. However, beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect life, the Routier family was experiencing significant financial stress. Darren's business had been struggling due to economic downturns and increased competition, and the family's expensive lifestyle was becoming difficult to maintain. They had significant debt, including mortgages on their home and business loans that were becoming difficult to service. The stress of financial problems was putting strain on the marriage, and Darlie was dealing with what appeared to be postpartum depression following Drake's birth in October 1995. Friends and family members would later testify that Darlie seemed different after Drake was born, more withdrawn and less energetic than her usual outgoing self. The prosecution would later argue that these financial and personal stresses provided Darlie with a motive for murder, claiming that she saw her children as burdens that prevented her from enjoying the lifestyle she wanted. They would present evidence of Darlie's spending on cosmetic surgery and luxury items while the family was struggling financially, arguing that this showed she was selfish and prioritized her own desires over her children's needs. However, family members and friends strongly disputed this characterization, arguing that Darlie was a devoted mother who would never harm her children, regardless of any stress she might have been experiencing. June 5, 1996, was a typical summer evening for the Routier family. Darlie and the boys had spent the day at home, playing in the backyard and enjoying the warm Texas weather. Darren was working late at his office, trying to deal with business problems that had been mounting for months. The family had dinner together when Darren returned home, and the evening proceeded normally with the children playing and the parents handling routine household tasks. Around 9 p.m., Devin and Damon asked if they could sleep downstairs in the living room, something they occasionally did as a special treat during summer vacation. Darlie agreed to let the boys sleep downstairs and set up blankets and pillows for them on the floor near the couch. She decided to sleep downstairs with them, partly to supervise them, and partly because baby Drake had been fussy, and she didn't want to disturb Darren's sleep since he had to work the next day. This decision to sleep downstairs would later become a crucial element in both the prosecution and defense theories of what happened that night. Darlie settled down on the couch with Drake in a bassinet nearby, while Devin and Damon made themselves comfortable on the floor a few feet away. According to Darlie's account, she fell asleep on the couch sometime around 10:30 or 11 p.m. and slept peacefully until she was awakened by someone or something around 2:30 a.m. She described waking up to feel someone attacking her, pressing on her shoulders and chest. In the darkness and confusion, she said she couldn't clearly see her attacker, but felt him moving away from her toward the kitchen area of the house. It was only then that she noticed the boys and saw that something terrible had happened to them. Devon appeared to be dead, while Damon was making gasping sounds and trying to move. Darlie said she tried to help Damon and then called 911, beginning the sequence of events that would ultimately lead to her arrest and conviction for capital murder. The 911 call that Darlie made at 2:31 a.m. became one of the most analyzed pieces of evidence in the case. The call lasted 5 minutes and 44 seconds, during which Darlie can be heard screaming, crying, and trying to get help for her children. To some listeners, Darlie's distress sounded genuine and consistent, with a mother who had just discovered her children had been attacked. To others, including prosecutors, the call seemed rehearsed or performed, with Darlie allegedly saying things that an innocent person wouldn't say, or failing to express the kind of grief that would be expected from a mother in her situation. The interpretation of this call would become a matter of significant dispute during Darlie's trial. When police and paramedics arrived at the Routier home at 2:35 a.m., they found a scene of chaos and violence. Devon Routier was clearly deceased, having suffered multiple stab wounds to his chest that had caused massive internal bleeding. Damon Routier was barely alive, with stab wounds to his back and chest, and was rushed to a hospital where he died during surgery. Darlie Routier was also injured, with a slash across her throat that had narrowly missed her carotid artery and could have been fatal if it had been slightly deeper. She also had defensive wounds on her arms that appeared consistent with someone who had tried to fight off an attacker. The physical evidence at the scene initially seemed to support Darlie's account of an intruder attack. The house showed signs of a struggle, with furniture overturned and blood throughout the living room. A screen window leading to the backyard had been cut, potentially providing an entry point for an intruder. A bloody sock was found in an alley about 75 yards from the house, containing blood from both Devon and Damon. However, as investigators processed the scene more thoroughly, they began to develop doubts about Darlie's story and started to suspect that she might have been responsible for the attacks herself. Initially, police treated Darlie Routier as a victim and survivor of a violent home invasion. She was taken to the hospital for treatment of her injuries, which included the throat wound and defensive wounds on her arms. Investigators began searching for evidence of an intruder and following up on leads about possible suspects who might have targeted the family. However, within a few days, the focus of the investigation began to shift toward Darlie herself, as detectives started to question inconsistencies in her story and began to suspect that the crime scene might have been staged. Several factors contributed to investigators' growing suspicion of Darlie. First, they questioned how an intruder could have entered the house, committed such a violent attack, and escaped without leaving more evidence of their presence. The cut screen window could have been staged, and there was no clear evidence of forced entry elsewhere in the house. Second, investigators were puzzled by the pattern of injuries, particularly the fact that Darlie had survived while both children had been killed. They questioned why an intruder would have left a witness alive who could potentially identify them. Third, detectives became suspicious of Darlie's behavior and demeanor in the hours and days following the murders. They felt that she didn't seem sufficiently grief-stricken for a mother who had lost 2 children, and they noted that she seemed more concerned about her own injuries than about her son's deaths. Video footage of Darlie at the children's graveside, where she was seen chewing gum and spraying silly string at a birthday celebration for Devon, was particularly damaging to public perception of her case. To many observers, this behavior seemed inappropriate and inconsistent with genuine grief. The investigation was also influenced by the fact that there were no signs of robbery or other obvious motives for an intruder attack. Nothing valuable had been taken from the house, and there was no evidence that the family had been specifically targeted by criminals. This led investigators to focus on possible domestic motives for the crime, particularly the family's financial stress and any problems in Darlie and Darren's marriage. The prosecution would later argue that Darlie had killed her children because she saw them as obstacles to the lifestyle she wanted to maintain. Most importantly, the investigation became focused on the blood evidence found at the crime scene. Investigators brought in blood spatter experts to analyze the patterns of blood throughout the living room, and these experts concluded that the blood evidence was inconsistent with Darlie's account of an intruder attack. Instead, they argued that the blood patterns proved that Darlie had been the one wielding the knife and that she had attacked her children while they slept on the floor near the couch. The prosecution's case against Darlie Routier was built primarily on blood spatter analysis performed by Tom Bevel, a forensic consultant who examined the crime scene and testified that the blood evidence proved Darlie had killed her children. Bevel's analysis focused on several specific areas of blood evidence that he claimed were inconsistent with Darlie's account of an intruder attack and could only be explained if Darlie had been the one attacking the children with a knife. The most important element of Bevel's analysis involved what he described as cast-off blood patterns on Darlie's nightshirt and on the wall near where the children were found. According to Bevel, these patterns were created when blood was flung from a knife as it was raised overhead between stabbings, and the location and characteristics of these patterns allegedly proved that Darlie had been standing over the children and stabbing them repeatedly. Bevel testified that the cast-off patterns were consistent with someone raising a knife overhead in a stabbing motion, and that the blood could only have gotten onto Darlie's shirt if she had been the one wielding the weapon. Bevel also testified about what he claimed was an absence of blood evidence that should have been present if Darlie's account were true. He argued that if an intruder had attacked the children while Darlie was sleeping on the nearby couch, there should have been blood spatter on Darlie and her clothing from the attacks. The fact that Darlie's injuries were relatively minor compared to the children's fatal wounds was also cited as evidence that she had inflicted her own injuries after attacking the boys. Additionally, Bevel testified about blood evidence around the kitchen sink that he claimed showed Darlie had cleaned blood off herself, or the murder weapon, after the attacks. He argued that this cleanup activity was inconsistent with someone who had just been attacked by an intruder and was trying to help injured children. Instead, it suggested someone who was trying to remove evidence of their own involvement in the crime. However, there were significant problems with Bevel's blood spatter analysis that would not be fully understood until years later. First, the methodology Bevel used was based on techniques and assumptions that have since been discredited by advances in forensic science. Blood spatter analysis in the 1990s relied heavily on subjective interpretation and rules of thumb that were not based on rigorous scientific testing. Many of the principles that analysts like Bevel use to interpret blood evidence have since been shown to be unreliable or completely incorrect. Second, Bevel's analysis ignored alternative explanations for the blood evidence that were consistent with Darlie's account of an intruder attack. The blood patterns that he claimed proved Darlie's guilt could potentially have been created by other mechanisms, including the movement of injured victims, the actions of first responders, or environmental factors at the crime scene. Bevel's testimony presented his interpretation as definitive scientific fact, when in reality, blood spatter analysis involves significant uncertainty and subjective judgment. Third, independent experts who later reviewed Bevel's analysis found serious flaws in his methodology and conclusions. These experts noted that Bevel had made assumptions about the crime that were not supported by the physical evidence, and that he had ignored blood evidence that contradicted his theory of Darlie's guilt. The cast-off patterns that formed the centerpiece of his analysis could have been created by mechanisms other than someone raising a knife overhead, and the absence of certain types of blood evidence could be explained by factors that Bevel had not considered. While the prosecution's case relied heavily on Tom Bevel's blood spatter analysis, there were several pieces of physical evidence that didn't support the theory that Darlie Routier had killed her children. These pieces of evidence were either ignored by the prosecution or explained away with theories that seemed implausible to many observers. The accumulation of evidence that didn't fit the prosecution's theory has become a central part of arguments for Darlie's innocence. The most significant piece of evidence that contradicted the prosecution's case involved two bloody fingerprints found at the crime scene that didn't match anyone in the Routier household. These fingerprints were discovered on a table in the living room where the attacks occurred, and they contained blood that was consistent with the victim's blood. Despite extensive testing and comparison to known individuals who had access to the house, including family members, friends, and first responders, the fingerprints remained unidentified. The presence of unknown bloody fingerprints at the scene of a violent crime strongly suggested that someone other than family members had been present during or immediately after the attacks. Another piece of evidence that didn't fit the prosecution's theory was a knife impression found in the carpet near where the children were attacked. This impression appeared to show the outline of a knife blade that had been pressed into the carpet, potentially during the struggle. However, when investigators compared this impression to the kitchen knife that was allegedly used as the murder weapon, they found that it didn't match. The impression was from a different type of knife entirely, suggesting that a different weapon had been used in the attack, or that multiple weapons had been involved. The prosecution also struggled to explain the bloody sock that was found in an alley about 75 yards from the Routier house. This sock contained blood from both Devon and Damon, and it had been placed far enough from the house that it would have required a deliberate trip to plant it there. The prosecution argued that Darlie had planted the sock to make it appear that an intruder had fled in that direction. But this explanation required Darlie to have made a 150-yard round trip, 75 yards each way, during the brief time period when she allegedly committed all her other actions. The timeline problems with the sock evidence were significant. According to the prosecution's theory, Darlie had to stab both children multiple times, inflict potentially fatal wounds on herself, stage various aspects of the crime scene, and plant the bloody sock in the alley, all within approximately 8 minutes, before calling 911. Independent analysis of this timeline suggested that it would have been physically impossible for one person to accomplish all these tasks in the available time, particularly while suffering from serious injuries that would have impaired her movement and cognitive function. Additionally, there were questions about Darlie's injuries that the prosecution never adequately addressed. The slash across her throat was within millimeters of her carotid artery and could easily have been fatal if it had been slightly deeper. Medical experts noted that it would have been extremely difficult and dangerous for someone to inflict such a wound on themselves, particularly in the dark and under stress. The prosecution argued that Darlie had carefully calculated the depth of the wound to make it appear serious without actually killing herself. But this explanation required a level of anatomical knowledge and precision that seemed unlikely. One of the most problematic aspects of the prosecution's case against Darlie Routier was the timeline they proposed for how she allegedly committed the murders and staged the crime scene. According to their theory, Darlie had to accomplish an enormous number of tasks in approximately 8 minutes between the time they claimed she began her attack and the time she called 911. Independent analysis of this timeline has suggested that it would have been physically impossible for one person to complete all the required actions in the available time. According to the prosecution's timeline, Darlie first had to attack and kill both of her children, who were sleeping on the floor near the couch where she had been sleeping. Devon was stabbed multiple times in the chest, requiring significant force and multiple knife thrusts. Damon was stabbed in the back and chest, also requiring multiple attacks. The prosecution argued that these attacks would have taken several minutes and would have resulted in significant blood loss and movement from the victims. After allegedly killing the children, Darlie would then have had to stage various aspects of the crime scene to make it appear that an intruder had been responsible. This staging allegedly included cutting the screen window to create an apparent entry point, overturning furniture to suggest a struggle, and creating blood evidence that would support her story of being attacked. Each of these activities would have required time and deliberate effort, adding to the overall timeline of events. The prosecution also argued that Darlie had planted the bloody sock in the alley behind the house, which would have required a round trip of approximately 150 yards. Running or walking this distance while injured, and potentially in the dark, would have taken several minutes, and the prosecution never adequately explained how Darlie could have accomplished this task without being seen or leaving more evidence of her movements. Most significantly, Darlie would have had to inflict serious injuries on herself, including the near-fatal throat wound and the defensive wounds on her arms. Medical experts have noted that self-inflicted wounds of this severity are extremely dangerous and difficult to control, particularly when inflicted in the dark and under stress. The precision required to create wounds that appeared serious but were not immediately fatal would have required considerable time and anatomical knowledge. Finally, Darlie would have had to clean up evidence of her involvement in the crime, including washing blood from herself and potentially the murder weapon, before calling 911. The prosecution argued that evidence of cleanup activity around the kitchen sink showed that Darlie had attempted to remove traces of blood, but this activity would have added additional time to an already impossible timeline. Independent experts who have analyzed the prosecution's timeline have concluded that it would have been physically impossible for one person to accomplish all these tasks in 8 minutes, particularly while suffering from serious injuries that would have affected their mobility and cognitive function. The timeline becomes even more impossible when considering that Darlie would have had to do all of this while avoiding detection by baby Drake, who was sleeping nearby and could have been awakened by the violence and movement. The blood spatter analysis that formed the foundation of the prosecution's case against Darlie Routier was based on forensic techniques that have since been discredited by advances in scientific understanding. In the years following Darlie's conviction, forensic scientists have recognized that many of the principles used in blood spatter analysis during the 1990s were not scientifically valid, and that expert testimony based on these techniques may have contributed to wrongful convictions. The fundamental problem with blood spatter analysis, as it was practiced in the 1990s, is that it was based more on intuition and experience than on rigorous scientific testing. Analysts like Tom Bevel relied on general rules and assumptions about how blood behaves when it is shed during violent crimes. But these rules had not been validated through controlled experiments or scientific study. Many of the conclusions that analysts reached were based on subjective interpretation rather than objective measurement, creating significant potential for error and bias. One of the most problematic aspects of early blood spatter analysis was the confidence with which experts testified about their conclusions. Analysts frequently presented their interpretations as definitive scientific facts, when in reality, their conclusions involved significant uncertainty and subjective judgment. This overconfidence led juries to give more weight to blood spatter evidence than it deserved, potentially contributing to wrongful convictions in cases where the analysis was incorrect. The specific techniques that Tom Bevel used in analyzing the Routier crime scene have been particularly criticized by modern forensic scientists. The concept of cast-off patterns, which was central to Bevel's testimony, has been shown to be much more complex and variable than early analysts understood. Blood can be cast off from weapons in many different ways depending on numerous factors, including the type of weapon, the force of impact, the victim's movement, and environmental conditions. The simple rules that Bevel applied to identify cast-off patterns and determine their meaning have been shown to be unreliable. Additionally, modern forensic scientists have recognized that blood spatter analysis must consider alternative explanations for observed patterns, rather than simply confirming a predetermined theory. In Darlie's case, Bevel's analysis appears to have been focused on finding evidence that supported the prosecution's theory of guilt, rather than objectively evaluating all possible explanations for the blood evidence. This approach is fundamentally unscientific and can lead to incorrect conclusions. The problems with blood spatter analysis in the Routier case are part of a broader pattern of forensic science problems that have been identified in criminal cases from the 1980s and 1990s. Many forensic disciplines that were widely accepted during this period, including hair analysis, bite mark comparison, and fingerprint examination, have since been shown to be less reliable than previously believed. The recognition of these problems has led to calls for systematic review of cases where potentially unreliable forensic evidence was used to secure convictions. In recent years, the Innocence Project has become involved in Darlie Routier's case, bringing new resources and expertise to the effort to prove her innocence. The Innocence Project is a national organization dedicated to exonerating wrongfully convicted individuals through DNA testing and legal advocacy, and their involvement in high-profile cases often signals that there are serious questions about the reliability of the original conviction. Their decision to take on Darlie's case has brought renewed attention to the forensic problems that may have contributed to her wrongful conviction. The Innocence Project's analysis of Darlie's case has focused on several key areas where they believe the original investigation and trial were flawed. First, they have highlighted the problems with the blood spatter analysis that formed the foundation of the prosecution's case, arguing that this analysis was based on scientifically invalid techniques and should not have been admitted as evidence. They have consulted with leading forensic experts who have concluded that Tom Bevel's analysis was fundamentally flawed and that his conclusions were not supported by the physical evidence. Second, the Innocence Project has emphasized the significance of the unidentified bloody fingerprints found at the crime scene. arguing that these prints provide strong evidence that someone other than family members was present during the attacks. They have called for additional testing and comparison of these fingerprints to expanded databases that might help identify the real perpetrator. The fact that these fingerprints remain unidentified after more than 25 years suggests that the investigation may have been inadequate and that important evidence was overlooked. Third, the Innocence Project has focused on the timeline problems with the prosecution's theory, arguing that it would have been physically impossible for Darlie to accomplish all the actions attributed to her in the available time. They have consulted with experts in human performance and movement, who have concluded that the prosecution's timeline is not realistic, particularly given Darlie's injuries and the complexity of the tasks she allegedly performed. The Innocence Project has also been advocating for comprehensive DNA testing that could potentially identify the real perpetrator or definitively prove Darlie's innocence. While some DNA testing was performed during the original investigation, advances in technology have made it possible to extract DNA profiles from smaller and more degraded samples than was possible in the 1990s. New testing could potentially identify DNA from the real perpetrator on evidence that was collected at the crime scene but never thoroughly analyzed. However, the Innocence Project has encountered significant obstacles in their efforts to secure Darlie's exoneration. The legal system is resistant to overturning convictions, particularly in death penalty cases, and courts often require new evidence to meet very high standards before granting relief. Additionally, some of the physical evidence from Darlie's case has been lost or degraded over the years, making it difficult to conduct the kind of comprehensive testing that might definitively resolve questions about her guilt or innocence. One of the most frustrating aspects of Darlie Routier's case has been the lengthy delays in completing DNA testing that was ordered by courts in 2018. This testing was supposed to analyze multiple pieces of evidence from the crime scene using advanced techniques that were not available during the original investigation. The results of this testing could potentially identify the real perpetrator or provide definitive evidence of Darlie's innocence. But as of 2026, nearly 8 years after the testing was ordered, the results remain incomplete. The delays in DNA testing appear to be caused by a combination of factors, including disputes over which evidence should be tested, questions about the chain of custody for some pieces of evidence, and the complex logistics of coordinating testing between multiple laboratories and legal jurisdictions. However, many observers believe that the delays are also caused by reluctance on the part of prosecutors and law enforcement to pursue testing that could potentially prove that they convicted an innocent woman. The evidence that is supposed to be tested includes the bloody sock found in the alley, various pieces of clothing and fabric from the crime scene, fingernail clippings from the victims, and other items that might contain DNA from the perpetrator. Advanced DNA analysis techniques can now extract profiles from very small amounts of genetic material, and it's possible that evidence that was considered unsuitable for testing in the 1990s could now yield valuable information about who committed the crimes. The potential results of the DNA testing could be revolutionary for Darlie's case. If testing identifies DNA from an unknown male on evidence from the crime scene, it would provide strong support for Darlie's account of an intruder attack. Conversely, if testing fails to find any evidence of an unknown perpetrator, it might support the prosecution's theory that Darlie was responsible for the attacks. However, the absence of DNA evidence would not necessarily prove Darlie's guilt, as DNA evidence is not always left behind during violent crimes. The delays in DNA testing have been particularly frustrating for Darlie's family and supporters, who believe that this testing could finally resolve questions about her innocence that have persisted for more than 25 years. They argue that Darlie has been on death row long enough, based on questionable evidence, and that she deserves to have the most advanced forensic techniques applied to her case. The continued delays raise questions about whether the criminal justice system is truly committed to finding the truth, or whether institutional interests are preventing a full investigation of potential wrongful conviction. The Darlie Routier case has been the subject of extensive media coverage over the years, including documentaries, true crime shows, and news investigations that have examined different aspects of the evidence and raised questions about her conviction. Much of this coverage has been sympathetic to Darlie, and has highlighted the problems with the forensic evidence that was used to convict her. However, the case remains controversial, with some observers continuing to believe in her guilt, while others are convinced of her innocence. The most significant recent media coverage was ABC's documentary, The Last Defense, which featured Darlie's case and presented evidence supporting her innocence. The documentary highlighted the problems with the blood spatter analysis, the significance of the unidentified fingerprints, and the timeline issues with the prosecution's theory. It also featured interviews with forensic experts who criticized the original investigation, and with family members who continued to maintain Darlie's innocence. However, the media coverage has also been criticized by some observers who argue that it presents a one-sided view of the case and ignores evidence that supports Darlie's conviction. Prosecutors and law enforcement officials have generally refused to participate in recent documentaries about the case, arguing that the evidence clearly shows Darlie's guilt and that media coverage unfairly portrays her as a victim of wrongful conviction. The case has also generated significant discussion on social media and true crime forums, where supporters and critics of Darlie debate the evidence and share their interpretations of what happened that night in 1996. These online discussions often focus on specific pieces of evidence, such as the 911 call, the bloody sock, or the unidentified fingerprints, with different groups reaching different conclusions about what the evidence proves. The continued media attention has helped keep Darlie's case in the public eye and has contributed to pressure for additional DNA testing and investigation. However, it has also created challenges for legal efforts to secure her exoneration, as extensive media coverage can make it difficult to find impartial judges and jurors for any future legal proceedings. The polarized nature of public opinion about the case reflects broader disagreements about criminal justice, forensic science, and the reliability of expert testimony in criminal cases. The Darlie Routier case represents more than just one potentially wrongful conviction. It highlights broader problems with forensic science and expert testimony that continue to affect criminal cases today. The blood spatter analysis that was used to convict Darlie was based on techniques that have since been discredited, but similar unreliable methods continue to be used in criminal cases across the country. The case demonstrates the need for better scientific standards and oversight of forensic testimony to prevent future wrongful convictions. The problems with blood spatter analysis in Darlie's case are part of a broader pattern of forensic science issues that have been identified in criminal cases from recent decades. Many forensic disciplines that were widely accepted in the past, including hair analysis, bite mark comparison, and firearms examination, have since been shown to be less reliable than previously believed. The recognition of these problems has led to calls for systematic review of cases where potentially unreliable forensic evidence was used to secure convictions. The case also highlights the dangerous overconfidence that expert witnesses sometimes display when testifying about forensic evidence. Tom Bevel's testimony about the blood spatter evidence was presented with absolute certainty, when in reality, his analysis involved significant uncertainty and subjective interpretation. This kind of overconfident expert testimony can mislead juries and contribute to wrongful convictions, particularly in cases where the forensic evidence is the primary basis for conviction. The timeline issues in Darlie's case demonstrate the importance of carefully analyzing the feasibility of prosecution theories, rather than simply accepting them as plausible. The prosecution's claim that Darlie could have accomplished all the alleged actions in 8 minutes was never rigorously tested or validated, but it became a central part of their case. Courts and juries need better tools for evaluating the plausibility of complex sequences of events, particularly in cases where timing is crucial to determining guilt or innocence. The delays in DNA testing in Darlie's case also reflect broader problems with how the criminal justice system handles potentially exonerating evidence. While courts have ordered DNA testing, the practical implementation of these orders has been slow and complicated, leaving Darlie on death row while questions about her innocence remain unresolved. The system needs better mechanisms for ensuring that potentially exonerating evidence is tested promptly and thoroughly, particularly in death penalty cases where the stakes are highest. As of 2026, Darlie Routier remains on death row in Texas, where she has spent more than half her life awaiting execution for crimes she maintains she did not commit. Her case has become a symbol of the broader problems with forensic science and wrongful convictions in the American criminal justice system, and her supporters continue to fight for her exoneration. The involvement of the Innocence Project and continued media attention have kept her case in the public eye, but the legal system has been slow to address the serious questions that have been raised about her conviction. The most immediate hope for Darlie's case lies in the DNA testing that was ordered in 2018 but remains incomplete. If this testing identifies DNA from an unknown perpetrator, it could provide the definitive evidence needed to prove her innocence and secure her release. However, even if the DNA testing supports her innocence, the legal process of overturning her conviction could take years longer, meaning that Darlie could remain on death row for years to come, despite evidence of her innocence. Darlie's case has also become part of broader efforts to reform forensic science and prevent future wrongful convictions. Her supporters have advocated for better scientific standards for expert testimony, improved oversight of forensic laboratories, and systematic review of cases where unreliable forensic evidence may have contributed to wrongful convictions. These reforms could help prevent other innocent people from experiencing what Darlie has endured for more than 25 years. The case has also highlighted the need for better legal representation in capital cases, as many of the problems with Darlie's original trial could potentially have been avoided if her defense team had access to better forensic expertise and more resources to challenge the prosecution's evidence. The complexity of modern forensic science requires defense attorneys to have access to qualified experts who can evaluate prosecution claims and identify potential problems with forensic testimony. Ultimately, Darlie Routier's case serves as a reminder that the criminal justice system is fallible and that even the most serious convictions can be wrong. The blood spatter evidence that seemed so convincing in 1997 has been shown to be based on scientifically invalid techniques, and the timeline that seemed plausible to the jury has been shown to be physically impossible. These revelations should give us pause about the reliability of forensic evidence and the certainty of our conclusions about guilt and innocence. The Darlie Routier case represents one of the most troubling examples of how junk science and flawed forensic analysis can send an innocent person to death row. The blood spatter evidence that convinced a jury to sentence Darlie to death was based on scientifically invalid techniques that have since been discredited by advances in forensic science. The timeline that prosecutors claimed proved Darlie's guilt has been shown to be physically impossible. The unidentified bloody fingerprints at the crime scene continue to suggest that someone other than family members was present during the attacks. For more than 25 years, Darlie Routier has maintained her innocence while sitting on death row, waiting for a criminal justice system that seems more interested in protecting old convictions than in finding the truth. The DNA testing that could definitively prove her innocence has been delayed for nearly 8 years, despite court orders requiring that it be completed. The forensic evidence that seemed so compelling in 1997 has been revealed to be scientifically worthless, but the legal system has been slow to acknowledge these problems and correct the injustice they created. The blood evidence in Darlie's case tells a clear story, but it's not the story that prosecutors presented to the jury. The unidentified fingerprints tell us that an unknown person was at the crime scene. The impossible timeline tells us that Darlie could not have accomplished what she was accused of doing. The discredited blood spatter analysis tells us that the scientific foundation of her conviction was fundamentally flawed. Taken together, this evidence suggests that Darlie Routier is an innocent woman who has been on death row for more than half her life, based on junk science and prosecutorial theories that don't match the physical evidence. The tragedy of Darlie Routier's case extends beyond one wrongful conviction. While she has been on death row for 25 years, the real killer of Devin and Damon Routier has remained free, never held accountable for taking the lives of 2 innocent children. The failure to properly investigate the crime and the rush to convict based on flawed forensic evidence has meant that justice has been denied not only to Darlie, but to her murdered sons as well. Darlie Routier's case serves as a powerful reminder of the fallibility of forensic science and the danger of overconfident expert testimony. The blood spatter analysis that seemed so convincing was actually scientifically worthless. The timeline that seemed plausible was actually impossible. The conviction that seemed certain was actually based on junk science and prosecutorial tunnel vision. These revelations should make us question our confidence in forensic evidence and demand higher scientific standards for expert testimony in criminal cases. The blood evidence in this case doesn't lie, but it doesn't say what prosecutors claimed it said. It tells the story of an innocent mother who survived an attack that killed her children, only to be convicted of their murders by a criminal justice system that valued convictions more than truth. After 25 years on death row, Darlie Routier deserves to have the truth finally emerge and to be freed from a conviction that was based on scientifically invalid evidence and impossible timelines. Thank you for watching this investigation into one of the most troubling death penalty cases in American history. If you believe that death penalty convictions should be based on reliable science rather than junk forensics and impossible timelines, subscribe to the Investigation Room right now. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our investigations into cases where flawed forensic evidence has destroyed innocent lives. Share this video with anyone who believes that the truth should matter more than protecting old convictions. And let me know in the comments, do you think Darlie Routier is innocent? And should DNA testing finally be completed after 8 years of delays? The blood evidence that convicted Darlie Routier has been revealed to be scientifically worthless, but she remains on death row while the real killer of her children walks free. Justice delayed is justice denied, and Darlie Routier has been denied justice for far too long. Asterisk, asterisk. End of script. Asterisk, asterisk. Asterisk, asterisk. Final word count. 8,000 words. Asterisk, asterisk.